My brother is the alpha villain. In the plot, he will rob the protagonist and eventually go bankrupt and end up on the streets. What about my wealth? For my own good, when he was about to catch the protagonist, I deliberately released the pheromone of Omega, locked him in the room, and kindly advised him, "Brother, a forced melon is not sweet." But the next moment, the pheromone with the scent of green grapefruit enveloped me. Oh no, his susceptible period has arrived. In a dim hotel room, I hugged the man's slender body, releasing my pheromones desperately, and advised him earnestly, "Brother, a forced melon is not sweet. A sufficient concentration of Omega's pheromones can interfere with the alpha's will." As I said that, I turned my head to look at the pretty Omega boy who was still standing in the corner, and said quickly, "Why don't you leave now?" Hearing what I said, the boy looked at me in surprise. He is indeed good-looking, with fair skin and delicate features. Even if he is just wearing the simplest white t-shirt, he is still stunningly good-looking. Not fragile, but makes people want to protect it. No wonder my brother was so moved. "But you can't move." The boy reacted quickly, and after a few minutes, the door was closed again. I finally breathed a sigh of relief. Just then, the sound of a man's heavy breathing was heard above my head. I looked up and met Qasim's slightly red eyes. He was obviously very angry. "Brother, I will hold back my pheromones now, can you take your time?" As I said that, I let go of his hand and prepared to run away. But before I took a few steps, a strong scent of green grapefruit swept over me, enveloping me like a tide. There is pheromone suppression between alpha and omega. My legs went weak and I fell to my knees. He turned back with a trembling voice, "Brother?" This turn almost scared me to death. A strange blush appeared on the man's handsome face, and his eyes were not as clear as usual. There was a primitive desire like a beast in his dark pupils. Broken. Could it be that my pheromones caused his susceptible period to come earlier? I was terrified and tried to crawl outside despite my weak legs. Behind me, footsteps were approaching. The man's voice sounded like the whisper of a demon in my ears. Wasn't the pheromone release just now very powerful? "What are you running for now?" "It's terrible. I am a person who travels through books." But unfortunately, I didn't dress up as a vicious male supporting role, nor as the male lead. Instead, he dressed like an ordinary passerby. Still an orphan. Fortunately, among the group of children living in the same orphanage with me, there was the future villain Qasim. In the plot, Qasim lived in an orphanage before he was 10 years old. After he was 10 years old, he would be taken back by Qasim's family, and then he would take charge of Qasim's family and become the de facto ruler of Qasim's family. Simply put, money. I was not afraid of hard life, so I followed him since I was young and became his most loyal lackey. But he has a gloomy personality, doesn't like to talk, and doesn't like to pay attention to me. Until later. When he was hit with stones by other children in the orphanage, I used my thin body to block him and a bloody hole was left on my head. His attitude towards me softened. When Qasim's family took me back home, they also took me in and raised me as their younger brother. 10 years passed in the blink of an eye. By the time I was 18 years old, I had differentiated into Omega. He also said that he would find me an alpha who knows me well in the future. But now, everything is gone. When he grabbed my ankle and dragged me into his arms, I finally got a little scared. "Brother, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Let me go, I'll go find you an inhibitor." If it weren't for the novel, Qasim would have fallen in love with the protagonist at first sight, robbed him, and finally been retaliated by the protagonist, bankrupt, and living on the streets. Why have I come to this? But people in the susceptible period are unreasonable. The hot breath sprayed on the back of my neck, bringing a tingling sensation. The concentration of alpha's pheromones in the air was too high. My head gradually became dizzy, my body began to heat up, and a secret desire inexplicably rose in my heart. Ugh. A short scream. I felt a pain at the back of my neck as Qasim's pheromones were injected into my body. The slightly astringent green grapefruit flavor blends with the sweet citrus flavor. It was like an electric current that quickly ran through my body, causing me to shudder. Under the huge stimulation, I unconsciously tilted my neck back, and all the strength in my body seemed to be drained away in an instant, and I became limp like a puddle of water. Suddenly, his body flew into the air. I subconsciously hugged his neck, and then I was thrown onto the bed. In front of me, the man raised his hand and pulled his tie, staring at me with dark eyes, like a wild animal locking onto its prey. The tie fell to the ground. The collar of the black shirt was wide open, revealing the exciting body beneath the thin clothes. My tailbone suddenly felt numb. I swallowed, and subconsciously moved towards the head of the bed. I caught a glimpse of suppressants for sale by the bed, and I was overjoyed. I shouted, "Brother, there are suppressants here. Calm down." After saying that, I took out my mobile phone from my trouser pocket and scanned the code. The whole process went smoothly. My mind was full of thoughts about getting the inhibitor, but I didn't notice that the man unbuckled his belt silently. The click sound was particularly clear in the dim room. At the same time, I scanned the code successfully, opened the cabinet selling inhibitors, and was about to reach out to take it. The other slender hand was faster than mine. I was stunned, but quickly reacted, "Brother, you can take it yourself." I just said it. How could my brother be so beastly as to attack me? I guess it's due to the influence of pheromones. Just wait until the inhibitor is taken. But before I could completely relax, a hot body pressed against my back, and the next moment, I watched as that hand reached over the inhibitor and took away the condom next to it. My pupils suddenly dilated. A breath mixed with the scent of green grapefruit fell beside my ears. "Ricky, but you provoked my brother first." "It's a mess. Everything is messed up." Qasim's hand restrained my wrists above my head. Looking into the man's lustful eyes, I felt like crying but had no tears. "Brother, Imri. It's not the protagonist Sean. Wake up." But as soon as I opened my mouth, my lips were blocked. Tossing and turning. His big hand was also restless and slid down to the edge of my pants. My eyes widened and I twisted my body desperately to try to keep my pants. But soon, I felt something hard and hot against my leg. The struggling movements suddenly froze. Plop, plop. My heartbeat suddenly started to stir. I couldn't tell whether it was his or mine, and the temperature in the room rose. Just when I thought the city gate was about to fall, there was a loud bang. The door was kicked open with force. Qasim paused in kissing me. Good things are interrupted. There was a look of impatience between the man's brows. After rolling me up with the quilt, he turned over and sat up, looking coldly at the people who came in. His tone was as cold as ice. "What can I do for you, Tao?" Tao? Tao? The main character attacks? My dizzy head suddenly became clear for a moment. It seems like this is part of the plot. The villain Qasim wanted to rob the protagonist, but the protagonist, the top, arrived in time and saved him. But isn't the protagonist okay now? I looked up curiously, and what caught my eye was a handsome face. The man had sharp brows, eyes like an eagle that pierced people's hearts, and his back was straight. It was obvious that he was not someone to be trifled with. Qasim is in a vulnerable period and exudes a sense of violence. When their eyes met, tensions were high. Just then, a slender figure came out from behind Tao. It was Sean, the protagonist who had just left. He looked at me, who was wrapped in the quilt, with concern, smiled at me kindly, and mouthed to me, "Don't be afraid." I understood it instantly. He must have been afraid that if I let him go, I would be beaten up by Qasim, so he specially called for help to save me. He really made me cry. But for some reason, a chill ran up my spine. I turned my head subconsciously, and happened to meet a pair of eyes that looked like a storm was coming. Bro, don't look at me like that. When Qasim met my gaze, his aura changed, and he even forced a smile, and asked me in a gentle voice, "Ricky, do you know them?" It's over. This is not good. As someone who knows Qasim well, I know that he is extremely angry now. As we all know, the villain and the male protagonist have always been mortal enemies. As his little brother, if I have any connection with the male protagonist, and I let Sean go today, I will be skinned alive if I don't die. I shook my head decisively, looked up at Sean and explained, "You misunderstood. He is in his susceptible period. I stayed to take care of him." but Sean was obviously a little unconvinced. He glanced back and forth between me and the cold-faced Qasim, seeming to be hesitant to speak. Tao glanced at Qasim, and finally his eyes slowly fell on me. Only my head was exposed, and he seemed to smile. He said sarcastically, "Qasim, since you already have someone, don't worry about other people's." After saying that, he deliberately took Sean's hand in front of Qasim and turned away. The door was closed again, leaving the room in dead silence. I looked back in fear. I thought I would face a storm, but unexpectedly, Qasim looked extremely calm. But if looks could kill, I estimate Tao would have died hundreds of times. Fortunately, after this incident, the beauty in the house disappeared. I quickly turned around and got the inhibitor. Seeing that he was still gloomy, I couldn't bear it, so I gave him some advice. "Brother, what I'm saying is that force and robbery don't work. If you really like someone, you have to treat him well." Hearing this, the man slowly turned his head, his dark eyes fixed on me, emotions surging in his eyes that I couldn't understand. After a while, I finally heard his voice. "Am I not good enough? How can it be good to hit a home run right at the start? If I don't call the police to arrest you, it means there is a bug in this world." Although I thought so in my heart, I still nodded perfunctorily. "Yeah, I know, you are the best in the world. Even though he's a villain, he's still my brother after all. I can only pamper myself." As I spoke, I stuffed the inhibitor into his hand. "Hurry up and fight." The concentration of pheromones in the air is so high that I feel a little dizzy. If it continues like this, I won't be able to control myself. Qasim's expression, which had just stabilized, suddenly sank again. But under my burning gaze, he still took the inhibitor from my hand. As soon as the inhibitor was applied, the strong smell of green grapefruit in the air faded a little. I threw back the quilt and was about to leave. "Brother, I'll go first." Before he could utter the wordlet, he was hugged tightly through the quilt. A low, hoarse voice entered my ears, with an air of leniency. "Didn't you say you would take care of me? Release some pheromones." I'm just saying. But during the alpha's susceptible period, omega's pheromones do have a soothing effect. I couldn't refuse, so I just agreed. "Oh, okay." The sweet citrus flavor slowly spreads and blends with the green grapefruit flavor. I don't know how long I was held. That night, my mood went up and down like a roller coaster. I was exhausted and fell asleep in a daze. Little did I know that the man lying next to me was breathing heavier, and then he let go of the hand that was holding me, raised his hand to cover his eyes, and his veins bulged with pain. Alpha's susceptible period lasts for several days. Although Qasim took suppressants, his mood was still unstable and he could not go to work. My original intention was to go home where there was a nanny and housekeeper who could take care of him conveniently. But he disagreed and just stared at me. I looked away guiltily. After all, it was me who caused his susceptible period to come early, so it is my duty to take care of him. So in the next few days, I was forced to stay in the hotel, releasing pheromones to appease him and acting as his human pillow for several days. It took a week before he stabilized. When his susceptible period ended that morning, there was no one around me when I woke up. I sat on the bed for a while, then tilted my head to look at the empty space next to me. For some reason, my heart felt empty. Then he shook his head. "What am I thinking about?" "The buzz?" Prompt sounded. I scratched my messy hair, took my phone from the bedside table, and saw a message from Qasim as soon as I opened it. "I went to work. You had breakfast at the hotel before going home." I replied with a cat head emoji. "Okay." Qasim replied almost immediately, patting his head. I stared at the same cat emoji he replied with, a big cat petting another small cat. Still strange, gentle? My heart beat faster for some reason, and then I lay back down. Illusion. It must be an illusion. 7. I didn't see Qasim for more than half a month. I heard that he was busy with a project recently and went on a business trip to another place. I was a little uncomfortable at first, but I quickly adjusted back to my original state and happily prepared things for school. The college entrance examination results came out a while ago, and I was admitted to University A. Although I have lived a good life with Qasim these years, I still remember what the director of the orphanage said to me in my previous life. Only by being a useful person can you avoid being abandoned by others. I still remember that day when the scores came out. Qasim was obviously happy. He should be happy that I didn't embarrass him. In the blink of an eye, it was the first day of school. I was prepared to go to school alone, but I didn't expect that when I packed my things and went downstairs, I saw a familiar figure. Qasim was sitting on the sofa with a laptop on his knees, explaining something with a serious expression. Perhaps he heard the noise. The person sitting on the sofa looked up, saw my appearance clearly, paused, then said a few words to the computer and closed it, walked towards me, and naturally took the suitcase from my hand. "Did you bring everything?" I nodded, thinking of his serious expression just now, and hurriedly said, "Brother, if you have work to do, go and do it first. I can do it by myself." Hearing this, Qasim frowned slightly and said, "What nonsense. Work is not as important as sending you to school. Let's go." After saying that, he walked past me and headed towards the door. Oh. I followed him out the door stupidly. Qasim drove me to school himself. I was still in shock when we arrived at school. He didn't act like a boss. After we parked the car, he carried my bags and walked towards the registration direction. As he walked, he reminded me, "If you get bullied at school or feel uncomfortable, remember to call me." In the sunlight, the man's profile was clearly outlined and he was mumbling. I was slightly stunned, and a strange feeling welled up in my heart. It feels sour and numb. I also went to college before I traveled through the book, but no one came to see me off, and no one gave me any instructions. Fortunately, I have long been accustomed to living alone. But now it seems a little different. Perhaps because he hadn't heard my response for a long time, Qasim turned his head and said with a rising tone, I came back to my senses and responded with a smile, "Okay, brother." Seeing this, his brows softened and a hint of smile rose in his eyes. But just as we finished registering and walked to the dormitory door chatting and laughing, we opened the door and were caught off guard by seeing a familiar figure. The boy was sitting at the table with headphones on his head. With fair skin and a superior profile, he looks like a boy who came out of a comic book. Who else but Sean? I subconsciously glanced sideways and sure enough, Qasim's eyes fell on Sean. The original joy in my heart disappeared and a sense of loss surged. Hearing the noise at the door, Sean turned around. The moment he saw me, he was delighted. Then he noticed Qasim standing behind me, and the smile on his face disappeared. But he still greeted me in a friendly voice, "You are here." I didn't know what to say for a moment, so I just nodded. This damn fate. Fortunately, this is at school and there are other people in the dormitory. Qasim didn't say much, just looked at Sean deeply, then put my luggage down, told me to eat well, and left. After watching his back as he left, I looked away and started to pack my things quickly. Sean took off his headphones, stood up, and walked towards me. "Do you need help?" His voice is very pleasant and gentle, giving people a feeling of being bathed in spring breeze. It's easy to like him. But I still shook my head and refused. "No, I can do it myself." We are now in a different position. Even though Qasim is a villain, he is still my brother. No matter how bad he is, I will always stand by his side. Given Qasim's villainous nature, if he fails this time, there might be a next time. Next time, I might not be able to stop it. Not long after the new students started school, military training began. Qasim would message me almost every day, asking about how I was doing at school. He will also video chat with me in the evening. I didn't think anything of it at first, but as it happened more and more times, I began to realize it. Is he using me to spy on Sean's dorm life? After figuring this out, I used the excuse that I was too tired from training and didn't video chat with him for several days. Hey, it's not that I don't want to talk to him. His thoughts are too dangerous. Bankruptcy warning. It's dusk again. On the way to the cafeteria after training, my roommate Benjamin put his hand on my shoulder and teased me, "Ricky, your body is not good, you need to practice more. Even if we are omegas, we can't ignore physical exercise." I looked at him weakly and said with a fake smile, "You are such a strong omega. We've been practicing all day. It's so hot, even a dog would stick out its tongue." Seeing me rolling my eyes, Benjamin couldn't stop laughing. But I don't know what he saw, he pushed me away and ran away. Fuck, how did this kid get here? I can't let him know that I differentiated into an omega. The moment I turned my head, Benjamin disappeared. When I turned around, I saw a tall and thin boy walking towards me. The boy seemed to have noticed Benjamin as well, and he stretched out his long legs and ran after him. The wind whistled past my ears. Young people are good. After military training, they can still play chase with each other. But just as I was about to reach the cafeteria, I suddenly heard someone next to me talking about it. Did you see that? Qasim seems to be coming to school. Qasim? Qasim?
But-
Where?
Well,
I turned around and rushed towards the dormitory. If I'm not mistaken, Sean has been having a fever these past 2 days. And Sean got heat stroke during military training and is now alone in the dormitory. As expected, he is still harboring evil intentions. I ran all the way back to the dormitory. Before I reached the door, I smelled a strong scent of gardenia mixed with green grapefruit. My heart sank suddenly. This is the smell of Sean and Qasim's pheromones. I rushed forward, but at that moment, my knees went weak. A tingling sensation came from my coccyx, and my breathing unconsciously quickened. I supported myself against the wall with my hands to keep my body steady, gasping for breath. The sweet scent of citrus permeates the air. Damn it. Why does it happen to be the fever period at this time? I cursed under my breath, but I didn't have the habit of carrying suppressants with me, so I finally reached the door and was about to open it when I heard Sean's weak voice from inside. Qasim, don't come over here. My hand on the door handle dropped, and my eyelashes trembled slightly. Finished. Didn't make it. It felt like a huge rock was pressing down on my heart, making it hard for me to breathe. But I couldn't think too much now. I felt so hot all over that I forced myself to walk out. The most urgent thing is to go to the infirmary to get an injection of inhibitor. Just as I turned around, the dormitory door was suddenly opened. Ricky, where are you going? A familiar voice came from behind me. I paused. So fast? But when he turned around, he saw that Qasim was dressed neatly, with not a single hair out of place, and he obviously didn't look like he had done anything bad. I was stunned. What is going on? As the man approached, the familiar smell of green grapefruit entered my nose. I barely managed to maintain my sanity and not throw myself into his arms. Brother, you are not right, Sean. Sean. Qasim frowned and explained calmly, I came to look for you, but you were not there. He happened to be in the fever period, so I gave him a dose of inhibitor to prevent it from affecting you. I also notified Tao to come and pick him up. Me, just that's it? Shouldn't it? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Oh, that's not right. Notify Tao? Are all villains these days like Qasim? Seeing me glaring, Qasim raised his hand, put it on my forehead, and said in a deep voice, Why is your face so red? His palms were cool. I rubbed it subconsciously, and my whole body began to feel uncomfortable again, eroding my remaining rationality. I begged, Brother, do you have any inhibitors? Give me a shot too. Because of the fever, my face was flushed and my eyes were slightly blurry. I had no idea how attractive I looked in the eyes of men. In the corridor, the man's Adam's apple rolled, his eyes changed color several times, and finally he said in a hoarse voice, The inhibitor is gone, let's go home. 11. No more? I didn't doubt him. Okay, let's go home. On the way back, I was still conscious at first, but later on, my consciousness became increasingly blurred, until I returned to a familiar apartment. I struggled to identify it, and it seemed to be an apartment near Qasim's company. He lived here alone when he was busy with work. I've been here several times. The car stopped at the door. When he carried me out of the car, I was still a little confused. Brother, how are we getting back here? Ever since Qasim took over the family business, he basically lives in the villa in the old house with me and my grandfather. Although his parents don't like me, fortunately I can please the old man. The housekeeper and nanny at home were quite polite to me. I thought he would take me home and ask the family doctor to give me an injection. Qasim's tone was natural. It's close here, and you have military training tomorrow, so it's troublesome to go back and forth. Actually, I don't really want to have military training. But I don't have time to think about these things now. He put me on the bed in the bedroom. His bedroom is minimalist in style, with gray tones, and looks perfect for sleeping. I kicked off my shoes and threw myself into the pillow, groaning in pain. Brother, go get the inhibitor. The person behind me didn't leave yet. I finally felt something was wrong, but before I could turn around, someone came up from behind. Pheromones with the scent of green grapefruit came flooding in. I felt comfortable and uncomfortable at the same time, but I was too weak to resist him. I struggled like a lamb to be slaughtered, shouting in agony, "Qasim, don't move." I heard that making a temporary mark is more effective than an inhibitor. A low, hoarse voice came from behind. The moment the words fell, I felt a wet touch on the back of my neck, followed by teeth piercing into a bulging gland. Well, I buried my head in the pillow and unconsciously let out a broken moan. But the person behind me didn't slow down his movements and bit me even harder, as if he wanted to tear me apart and swallow me. This was different from the previous bite. He bit for a long time, and who knows how much pheromone was injected? The corners of my eyes were red and wet with tears. Pain. Good. Quote, Qasim is right. Temporary markers are indeed more effective than inhibitors. Because the next day I was standing in the sun for military training again. I cursed in my mind, but during the break, my hand unconsciously touched the back of my neck. It still hurts a little. Benjamin came over and sniffed me. "Hey Ricky, you smell like an alpha." Hearing this, I subconsciously explained, "Ah? Oh, it's my brother's. I was in the fever phase and he helped me. Qasim likes Sean. I guess you're helping me because you're afraid it'll affect my military training? I am so grateful to him." Ha! After hearing my explanation, Benjamin's eyes widened, he was dumbfounded, and finally muttered to himself thoughtfully, "How can good brothers do this?" Before I could hear what he said, a female beta came over and said excitedly, "Fuck! Orthopedics." I quickly waved my hands. "No, we are not related by blood." I thought she would understand after I explained it this way, but unexpectedly she became even more excited. "Pseudo-orthopedics is even more delicious." I'll take a sip first. In the following days, I didn't have a fever again and completed the military training safely. On the night when the military training ended, after singing the chorus, everyone sat on the lawn and chatted. Benjamin was the first to jump up and said, "Hey, the military training is over, let's go play together." Sean was there too and smiled when he heard this. "Where are we going?" "How about going to the bar for a drink? Or going to KTV for a sing-along?" This was said by an alpha from the next class. His name is Charles. Charles and I were high school classmates. We used to get along pretty well, but after I differentiated into an omega, he distanced himself from me. "Let's have some drinks." We sang tonight. Benjamin made the final decision and looked at me and Sean. "What do you two think?" I don't mind and Sean doesn't have any objection. So the group went straight to the bar near the school. Charles sat next to me in the booth, handed me a cocktail and whispered, "Ricky, long time no see." I tilted my head to look. Charles was handsome, about 1.85 meters tall. He was originally a sports student. He had dark skin but bright eyes. I heard that there are a lot of people chasing after him in school. How have you been lately?" he asked again. "Fine." As I said that, I took a sip of wine, and out of the corner of my eye I saw Sean drinking too. Under the spotlight, the boy has fair skin, soft facial lines, and long eyelashes that flutter like the wings of a butterfly. Just sitting there was enough to attract people's attention. I felt a little irritated for no reason. I wish I were this good-looking. After drinking several cups in a row, I finally suppressed the anger in my heart. But although the anger was suppressed, I felt a little confused. When Charles was leading me outside, I regained consciousness for a moment. "Charles, well, you're drunk and the dormitory is closed now, so go to a nearby bar and spend the night there. The pheromone belonging to alpha penetrates into the nose, and it smells like red wine." I subconsciously wanted to push him away. "Well, AO is different. I'll call my brother and ask him to pick me up." But he didn't push it open. Beside him, Charles's voice sounded a bit gnashing. Ricky, do you know why I stay away from you? Why? I felt like there were several figures swaying in front of me. It's all because of your brother. Before he finished speaking, I smelled a familiar scent of green grapefruit. Then, he was forcefully brought into a warm embrace. I struggled to open my eyes, saw who it was, and asked in surprise, "Brother?" The man's face was a little gloomy. He glanced at Charles coldly, then picked me up and said, "Go home." I naturally nestled in his arms. Behind him, Charles shouted unwillingly, "He thinks you are his brother." Qasim ignored him. I didn't say anything either. It was strange. If I didn't regard Qasim as a brother, what else could I regard him as? It was already late when we got back to the apartment, and I insisted on taking a shower. I'm tired after a whole day and my whole body is covered with sweat. Qasim was worried, but after my insistence, he let me in to wash. Warm water rushed down. I sobered up a little, but just as I finished washing and was about to get dressed, my legs went limp and I felt a familiar tingling sensation in my tailbone. With a bang, I was leaning on the sink, reaching for my clothes, and accidentally dropped the hand sanitizer. The next moment, the door behind him was suddenly pushed open. I turned back subconsciously and was stunned. Seeing me standing there, Qasim walked towards me, his eyes swept over my whole body, and his voice was a little hoarse. "Fever again?" When I heard his voice, I came to my senses, turned my back, and started to put on my clothes in a hurry. After putting on his underwear, he pretended to be calm and said, "Brother, come on, mark me again." Temporary marking is indeed better than inhibitors and can last a few days longer. But the fever period has not yet passed, the effect of the temporary mark has dissipated, and the fever has returned. After saying that, I waited for a while. But he didn't move for a long time, so I turned around. I was caught off guard and met the man's dark eyes. My heart skipped a beat. This was the same look he gave me in the hotel before. "Elder brother?" Hearing this, Qasim's eyes changed slightly, and helplessness appeared between his brows. He took a bathrobe and wrapped me up and whispered, "Ricky, do you know what the mark means?" This was the first time he called me by my full name. My eyes flickered. Because I grew up in an orphanage, I studied very hard since I was young, for fear that I would be looked down upon. Even when I came to this world, I finally had a family, but I was afraid of bringing shame to them and being kicked out of Qasim's family, so I absorbed this unfamiliar knowledge day and night. Of course I know AOs will only tag each other if they like each other. But what does it matter if you know? He doesn't like me. I laughed and said, "Brother, didn't you say that temporary marking is more effective than inhibitors?" "Yes, but there is another meaning." "Yes, what is it?" I suddenly started to stutter and didn't dare to look at him. But his voice penetrated my ears through the steam. "I don't know what you misunderstood, but I don't like Sean. I have only met him a few times, and he is the person Tao likes. I don't have the hobby of being a third party. Ricky, from the beginning to the end, you are the only one I like." With a bang, it was like fireworks exploding in my mind. What did he just say? The villain likes me, a passerby? But I still remembered one thing, stumbling over my words. "Didn't you bring Sean to the hotel before?" Qasim was frank when talking about this incident. I had just finished a cocktail party and felt that I was about to become susceptible, so I booked a room to rest. He came to my room for no apparent reason, and before I could get rid of him, you came. I grasped the point sharply. Was he about to reach his susceptible period? As if sensing what I was thinking, Qasim coughed lightly, his ears reddening. "It wasn't that fast originally, but I couldn't control myself once you came." The smell of citrus grew stronger in the air. I was already feeling restless in my heart. This time he was getting more and more out of control, like a beast out of a cage. I stood on tiptoe and kissed him on the lips. The man's pupils shrank slightly, and then he hugged my waist. I can't quite remember how we rolled from the makeshift mark to the bed. All I remember is that he bit me from the back of my neck. It wasn't long before the last bit of fabric I had on was gone. The lights overhead were shaking. I didn't fall asleep until the sky in the distance turned white. 15. In my dream, I seemed to be back to when I was 8 years old. Because I have rich experience in the orphanage, even if I was hit by a car and came here to start all over again, I could adapt quickly. He has been helping the dean since he was young, and he gets chicken legs in return by doing nice things for him. I gave them all to young Qasim to cheer him up and nourish him. I approached him with selfish intentions because I knew he was from Qasim's family. But he was completely unaware of this. After he knew that there was only one chicken leg each time, he refused to eat it anymore. He even stayed by my bed for several days without closing his eyes when I was hit on the head with a stone for him. After I woke up, I learned that he, who had always been a loner, had humbly begged the dean to find a doctor for me. After my injuries stabilized, I beat up those who hurt me and was punished by the dean by being put in a small dark room. He is very afraid of the dark. When I stumbled over to him, he looked terribly pale. But the moment he saw me, he just asked me, "Does your head still hurt?" My tears immediately fell, and I cried and threw myself into his arms. "Brother." He let me hold him, "Call me brother, and you are mine from now on." Because I called him brother, when Qasim's family members came to visit him, he firmly held my hand and said, "You can let me go back, but I want to take him back with me." Qasim's family was reluctant at first, but they couldn't persuade Qasim and finally agreed to take me back. 10 years in Qasim's family. I have seen Qasim look tired, and I have seen him get mad at his men. But he never let me suffer any injustice. All the irritable and sour emotions of these days have an answer at this moment. Think. I don't know since when, I also fell in love with him. 16. I thought Qasim should have gone to work, but when I opened my eyes, I was met with a magnified handsome face. Elder brother? As my thoughts returned, my senses also returned. I grimaced in pain every time I moved. Hiss. Seeing this, Qasim's expression tensed up, and he pretended to lift the quilt, and asked with concern, "Where does it hurt?" I covered myself with the quilt, my face flushed with embarrassment. "No, it doesn't hurt." He was quite gentle last night. My whole body is sore, as if I ran 1,000 meters overnight. Hearing this, Qasim breathed a sigh of relief. "Are you hungry? I'll get you something to eat." I nodded and wanted to get out of bed to wash up, but as soon as my feet touched the ground, my legs started shaking. A muffled laugh came from behind. I turned around and glared at him. The culprit stopped smiling, walked around to my side, and carried me to wash up. I enjoyed it with peace of mind. I just glanced at the trash can and saw a package that looked particularly familiar. It seemed like the one he took away from the hotel that day. So, the person he wanted to rob by force was always me? 17. Although things became outrageous, they seemed quite normal. For example, he still has a feud with Tao, but the company currently looks very stable and doesn't look like it could be bankrupted. But after that day, he didn't allow me to call him brother. Except sometimes, of course. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. By my junior year, I had completed all of my credits. When I went to Lou's company for internship, I was very happy. "Brother, you can relax a little bit from now on. Instead of waiting for the wind to come, it is better to chase the wind. I will try to be a little better, both for myself and to be able to walk side by side with him." Behind the desk, the man's facial features became more profound than they were 2 years ago. Hearing what I said, the person opposite raised his head, his eyes moved slightly, and then a soft look appeared in his eyes. He waved at me, "Come here." I went over as he said, but he hugged me tightly. A deep voice sounded beside my ears, "As long as you are by my side, I will be happy." My heart stopped. The loneliness and vigilance accumulated during the past days of wandering all dissipated, gathered into warmth, flowing through every part of my body. But before I could feel moved, a hot breath fell on my neck. I subconsciously felt something was wrong. "Brother, I'm going to work." "No hurry, let's make a temporary mark first." All the curtains were drawn, and soon my sobbing could be heard in the office. What kind of nice guy would take off his clothes to make a temporary mark? Extra, Qasim. The moment he saw Sean, Qasim suddenly had a new memory in his mind. In his memory, even though he knew that the boy in front of him was the one his mortal enemy Tao liked, He still became interested in this Omega and wanted to take him away by force. But he failed, and Tao arrived in time to save the Omega. After that, he began to target Tao at every turn without regard for the consequences, even resorting to trickery to force the Omega named Sean, and ended up losing everything and ending up on the streets. This is really fucking ridiculous. He gave up the baby he raised and fell in love with his mortal enemy? It's not like he's sick. After realizing what was happening, Qasim was about to ask the person to leave, but unexpectedly, Ricky came. This silly boy hugged him tightly as soon as he came and released a lot of pheromones. He was about to reach his susceptible period, and he couldn't help himself when he was hugged by him. After Sean was driven away, he couldn't control himself, dragged him into his arms, and bit the gland that he was dreaming about. In fact, he originally wanted to take it slow, first drive away the alpha around Ricky, and then be nice to Ricky. Like Ricky said, take it slow. But he brought this upon himself. Pity. That damn Tao actually came and ruined his good thing. But it doesn't matter. Later he went back. After seeing Sean enter a fever period, he deliberately gave the Omega an inhibitor and then called Tao to come over. The pain of having the meat in front of you but not being able to eat it should be experienced by Tao too. But what was unexpected was that Ricky also entered the fever period. I asked him softly, "Brother, do you have any more inhibitors? Can you give me one too?" He actually had inhibitors in his pocket, but selfishness made him lie. "The inhibitor is gone, let's go home." At that moment Qasim had only one thought. He wanted to tag Ricky badly.